Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 197 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Fabiola Wilcox, the VP of Marketing and Communications at Footballco. We spoke about Fabi's journey through sports, making a difference, getting more women in leadership roles, and much more. Fabiola Wilcox, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Marcus. Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show. You are the VP of Marketing and Communications at the Footballco. So can you tell us a little bit about the company and your role?
Yes, of course. So Footballco, we are a global football media company operating, a portfolio of brands that really serve the full spectrum of football, from breaking news through the lens of our flagship brand called Go, through the more cultural storytelling through the lens of our brand called Mundial, which is quite well known, especially here in the UK, but also our women's football community brand called Indivisa. So we have a number of, brands in our portfolio, but all very much geared towards providing amazing content across many different languages and many different territories across the world. That's the best way to explain it. And my role as a VP of Marketing and Communications is to very much position us externally as the go-to brand to do business with, particularly when it comes to large-scale events like the World Cup and the Euros, for example, which is coming up.
That's fantastic. And I mean, it's a great time. There's a lot of things happening on the football front, both on the men's and the women's side. So I guess that you have a lot on your plate with, upcoming big tournaments and World Cup and so forth.
Oh, gosh, yes. So I think for Footballco, these next couple of years, both in terms of World Cup next year and then the Women's World Cup in Brazil in 2027 is an incredibly busy time for the brand. We have, a lot of interest coming in and a huge pipeline of work growing exponentially. But also imminently, actually, we've got the Women's Euros next month happening in Switzerland. We are just in the process, actually, of delivering this huge watch party for the Euros in partnership with Adidas, which is going to be happening at Hoxton Docks from the 9th to the 13th of July. So, match day screenings, workshops, talks, podcast recording, and a ton of Adidas experiences for fans to come in, enjoy, but also come together as a community as well. So we're incredibly excited about that, and everyone's invited to come and join.
That's fantastic. So if we focus on the women's side, how do you see the women's football evolving and the future of that?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I personally see an incredibly bright future for the women's game. I think we are way past the point of proving, that there is an audience for it. The job now really is about, how do we focus on building an ecosystem that is sustainable and can drive the game forward? So that is kind of where I see a incredibly bright future for the women's game. And also is worth saying, we all forget that for a very long time, women were not actually allowed to play football. So we had a 50-year ban which we're still trying to close the gap, right? So that's why there was a really good book called The Women's Game by Susan Rack, I think it is, a great author, but is a brilliant reminder of, where we were and where we are now and kind of that history of the ban. So really, really interesting read for anyone who, is interested in women's football history, but just wants to understand a little bit more about that context. But anyway, I'm going off topic. What I'm trying to say is, phenomenal progress, but it's still a long way for us to go. I think in this race for change, what perhaps is happening is we're trying to replicate in the women's game a lot of what happens on the men's game. And as we talked about many, many times, this is a different product. And perhaps that copy and paste approach is stopping us in many ways from delivering a distinct product that has its own identity and that it needs to be brought to life and marketed in a completely different than what we have been doing for many years on the men's side. So, it's a really interesting space right now, and I love how things are going, and I think there is a massive opportunity for brands and sponsors and partners to be able to come in if they understand that celebrating that difference is where the really sweet spot for engaging football fans is.
Definitely. And I mean, there is huge potential in the commercialization of the women's game. And when they have done studies, it shows that like the fans of women's sports and women's football are very, very genuine, and they're very willing to spend money on to support their team and to be engaged. So I think there is a huge potential, as you said, on if you look at it as its own product and not just doing a copy paste.
Exactly.
If we talk about on the leadership side, I mean, you're the VP of marketing, you have had, other director roles. So as a woman in the sports industry, which is mostly male dominated, how do you think that the sports industry can better support women to be able to get into leadership roles?
Yeah, it's a very important point, and something that really needs addressing. I think, first and foremost, it's about getting more women into football. This year, we did an International Women's Day campaign, which was very much focused around making roles more visible for girls in early education so that they are, let's say, exposed enough to a career in football to be able to choose a career in football later on. So we are doing these career workshops in partnership with Bloomsbury Football and our friends at Unilever, which we're incredibly excited about. But once we get those, young talent into the sport, I think then the job becomes, how do we keep them? How do we nurture them? How do we coach them into becoming the next generation of female leaders in sport? So I think that's really important. And then later on, then the job becomes slightly different, is how do we bring back moms into the business of football after having had children, for example. So with things like job sharing opportunities, part-time and hybrid opportunities, flexible working, enhanced maternity and paternity leave, all of those things that really will make a difference and mean that moms are not being asked to choose whether they want to get back to work or look after their children. So I think understanding that one size doesn't fit all and having the right practices in place to accommodate those differences, I think that's absolutely key in supporting women in senior leadership positions in sport. I think that there is not a single woman that I have ever spoken with that has left the sporting industry because they didn't like it. But there is about a dozen women that have left because they didn't get the support that they needed.
So it's a little bit the same approach as to the when we talked about the commercialization. It cannot be a copy paste here either. You need to see that there are specific. It's a different thing. We said with maternity leave, it's different for men and women, obviously, that and coming back from that. So in order to help to make that more seamless.
Exactly, because it's like I said, one size doesn't fit all, and I think that is really important to understand. I mean, there will be a lot of women that have children and come back to work very quickly. Others need more time. I remember, recently we have been talking about, extending paternity leave rights, and, Footballco has done an amazing job in doing that recently, which is great to know. But there was a few people that asked, but why paternity and not maternity? And we were like, well, from the moment that you have enhanced paternity leave, you then allow women with different women will have different needs, but it's about, perhaps the husband or the partner will stay more at home so that women can come back to work quicker. So there is different needs for different people. And I think it's just understanding that those differences and being able to cater for that.
That's one challenge, of course, but what are some other challenges that you see that women are facing in the sports industry?
I think access to being able to be sitting at the tables where decisions are being made. I think that is something that is important to acknowledge, particularly when you look at the makeup of boardrooms and senior leadership teams in clubs and federations, for example. It's safe to say a lot of work needs to be done there, and perhaps access to those roles is incredibly difficult for women. So, from the moment that we start to nurture those professionals and those leaders in, any working environment, you're going to see a huge uplift in the percentage of women sitting in these positions, and inevitably having a more diverse, makeup of your boardroom will enhance the business of football, right? Like it did for any other industry. So diversity really drives, innovation through friction, and it's something that I truly believe in, and is really important that we all make a conscious effort to make that change. And this is where we need allies, right? We need a lot of allies across the board to be able to make that change happen, whilst we're not yet a big percentage of decision making when it comes to the corridors of power, let's call it.
So when you say allies, is it like male allies or both, or from, where do you need that support?
Absolutely. So, I mean, male allies who understand that their voice is incredibly important in making a change for women in the workplace, whether it be in football or elsewhere.
You're someone who has made this journey within the sports industry and gotten to executive levels in this industry. So if we talk about your journey, how did you get into the sports industry in the first place? And if we work ourselves through your journey to where we are now?
I think if I was ever going to work in sport, it had to be football, just to start there. Football and F1, actually. So much now, but when I was growing up, I was obsessed with Formula One. I think most kids in Brazil who grew up watching Ayrton Senna were absolutely in the same position. But anyway, so football has always had a sweet spot for me, right? I still remember very, early on, World Cup in 1990, for example, in Italy. I think Brazil was playing Argentina, quarterfinals. I remember me watching the game at home with my friends and family. Brazil had so many chances to score in that game. It was incredibly exhilarating to watch. Maradona got tackled, someone got sent off. Anyway, Brazil ended up losing that game, unfortunately. And I remember going into my room at 10 years old and crying out of frustration. And I think I was totally gripped by the sport from then onwards. But actually, it wasn't until I worked for Barclays not long ago that the idea of working in sport started to properly form in my head. I think back then I got exposed to football by helping the bank to activate their Premier League sponsorship. And then I loved how we've made that pioneering decision to transition into women's football. And that was a big, big, big win for the team. That was a massive point of difference for the brand. And for me personally, it was just a brilliant experience to work in that environment and be part of that team. And I think after that, I knew that I wanted to work in sport.
Yeah, because you have a diverse background. As you said, you worked for Barclays, but you also worked at BlackBerry. And so how do you think that these experiences from different fields is helping you now in your current job?
Oh gosh, yeah, and it started way before that. Actually, if I look back at my time at university back in Brazil, I started doing an internship at the same time that I started my uni course. And I think I must have worked in every single department in that agency back in my hometown in Brazil, from accounts to client services to media, strategy planning. And it wasn't until I moved into the creative department that I kind of truly found my groove. But anyway, so when I moved here to the UK and me getting my job at BlackBerry, which at the time for me was my absolutely dream job. I think I remember getting my start kind of new joiner kit at the BlackBerry offices just before my first day in the office. Kind of, a little bag with a notebook, a bottle, the usual giveaways that you would expect in one of those bags. And then inside there was a brand book. And I remember coming home, sitting down, reading that brand book from cover to cover, which isn't something that you would expect anyone to do, to be that excited about reading a brand guideline. But anyway, for me at the time, it was this amazing sentiment to be working for a global brand like BlackBerry. Remember, this was way before the big boom of the iPhone, right? No, it wasn't about. So everyone had a BlackBerry. Everyone was sending BBMs way, way before WhatsApp was even a thing. So I think that's where my love for great brands truly began. We had an awesome team, an awesome culture, and I think I'm forever grateful for my old boss, Taranji Delizio, actually, who took the chance on me and gave me a break in the industry. And I think I never looked back since.
That's fantastic. So yeah, because BlackBerry was like the first smartphone, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the first smartphone in the world. And it's really interesting because I remember we had a town hall back then. It was just before the iPhone was launching. And, if you remember, the big thing about the BlackBerry was the keyboard, right? That's what enabled you to send emails. And that was the big thing, was big point of difference was the keyboard. And I remember we had this big town hall, and then someone asked, someone from the senior leadership team at the time, if they were not concerned about the launch of the iPhone. And their response stuck with me because they said, no, we're not concerned because they don't have a keyboard. That was a really interesting point. And I always remember that and, always make sure that you're not missing the point of what's about to happen in front of you, right? So yeah, that was an interesting time at BlackBerry.
Yeah, the famous last words.
Famous last words. And
It's like when the internet was coming about, it was the same thing some people said, or like with a home computer, that you don't need it. And it's not easy to predict the future, but it's funny looking back when you have the answers to see how some people saw it at that point.
yes, exactly. There's actually a really interesting film about BlackBerry. I think it's on Amazon Prime or something like that. I think it's called Research in Motion, or have a look. It's called the BlackBerry film, and it really is a great portrait of what happened in that company right at the time when I was there. So yeah, it's a great watch.
So you said that you knew you wanted to work in sports at your time at Barclays, and that was maybe somewhere in the 2018, 2022 timeframe somewhere. But you studied marketing and advertisement. So the brand part, is that always something that you wanted to, you knew that you wanted to work within branding and advertising and marketing?
I think I stumbled across, like I said, back home in Brazil, my niche and what I thought I was going to be doing for the rest of my career was copywriting. That was what I was really into. When I finished uni, I started to look for jobs in the big advertising agencies, which at the time were very much concentrated in Rio and Sao Paulo. And I remember I was getting lots of attention and lots of interest on my CV. But because those agencies had a lot of international clients, they really needed someone that was speaking English fluently, right? And even though similar to you guys here in Europe, right, you learn languages in school, but by no means I would call myself fluent at that time. And I think I was stumbling on that specifically. And a friend of mine was moving to the UK, and she just convinced me to come and do a gap year in the UK. And that is how I ended up coming here and never turning back. So back to your point, the way that I stumbled across branding was because the thing that I thought I was going to be doing for the rest of my life, which was copywriting, was not possible for me at the time, because obviously I needed to be speaking much, much better English, to be able to be copywriting in English. So if I couldn't go for the words, I ended up going for the visuals. And I think that's where I stumbled across branding, especially when it comes to visual identity, which is really where it all started back at BlackBerry. And then things just evolved from there.
Interesting. So, I mean, yeah, languages are an asset. And obviously now you sound like a Brit to me, at least.
Thank you. That's a very good compliment.
I think I read somewhere that you speak English and Italian, but I guess also maybe Portuguese as well, I suppose, or?
Yeah, exactly. So I dabbled in across many languages, but obviously Portuguese and English are my core. And, I would like to think I speak a little bit of Spanish and Italian as well.
Ah, nice. So is that something that helps you now in your role, since, the football industry is an international one?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have that foundation. I think once you speak one language, it's easier to learn and try your luck with others. Particularly Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian is really close as kind of languages go. So it's a great foundation to be able to communicate. And ultimately, this is what it's about, right? It doesn't matter grammar or expressing yourself perfectly. It's not about that. It's just about communicating.
That's true. I don't think we mentioned it yet, but you also worked at the Southampton Football Club. So how was it like to work for a club versus now when it's more, more general within the sports industry?
It was incredibly exciting. I think the way that came about was interesting as well. After COVID, again, I was working for Barclays. I wanted to take a little bit of time off. So I planned that in 2020. I knew I was going to do that in 2021. So, like most people, I didn't do much during COVID. So I saved some money and kind of organized myself that way. And then I went to spend some time back home with my mom, my friends back home in Brazil. So probably I would say maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I was there, I got calls about 2 roles out of the blue. So the first one was a dear colleague of mine who was going on maternity leave, and she wanted someone to come and cover her time off. And I was talking to her about this role. And then all of a sudden, the following week or a few days later, I got a recruiter calling me saying that Saints wanted to talk to me. I think the chief commercial officer at the time, who was David Thomas, was looking for someone to come and lead this new brand experience and comms function that they were setting up in the club. David was a ex-Virgin man. He was a brand man, understood the value of brand and how clubs really need to be acting much more like consumer brands, particularly because it makes so much sense commercially. But anyway, we had a few online chats and things just progressed really quickly from there because by the time that happened, I was already negotiating my offer with this other finance brand, which must remain anonymous. And then anyway, Saints having this great deal of experience in how transfers work in the world of football, they've managed to close the deal pretty quickly. And before I knew, I was on a flight back home to England to do my first home match against Liverpool. And it was, incredibly exciting time working for Saints. I think on that game, we drew 4-4 against Liverpool at home. And yeah, I was absolutely hooked in working in football from then onwards.
Yeah, I understand that. And then after that, moved on to Footballco, where you are now. So are there any particular moments or takeaways that you have taken so far in your time at Footballco?
Oh gosh, yes. There's so much amazing work happening at Footballco. particularly around the women's game. Obviously, we've got Indivisa. We talked about what we're doing for the Euros here, but in North America, there is this exponential growth of women's soccer, which is great to see. We have just acquired a brand called Soccer Girls Problems, which is almost like a one-stop shop for girls soccer in the US. So we are in the process of rebranding and kind of almost bringing that into the fold of the Footballco ecosystem. So it's really, really exciting. We are, launching new programs, new formats, particularly for Mundial. We are expanding our footprint beyond our print business. We have just launched a digital content proposition, which really is about bringing football culture in long form content to fans online. So we're incredibly excited about that. We are launching and leaning into video content for Mundial as well, launching a few different formats, which should be live on our channels very, very soon. Working with a number of brands. We have just launched our Puma King boot in partnership with Puma, which are, something that was a dream project for everyone involved in Mundial and a Footballco as well. Gosh, there is a lot happening in the organization, and I'm incredibly proud and really happy to be working for a forward-thinking brand who understands communities, understands differences, and really knows how to create content at scale for football fans worldwide. Is an absolute pleasure to be working for the brand, and I'm really happy here.
That's fantastic to hear, and incredibly exciting to have so many important projects also that will make a change in the sports industry.
Indeed, I think that's where I feel like I'm making a difference. So it's really good to be able to come to work every day and feel like, you are, of course, earning your bread and butter, but also leaving things in a much better state than where you found them. So I think that is also really working through that lens of that purpose is really important for me as a professional as well.
Has that always been like the purpose? Has that always been something that is strong for you to work towards that?
I think not in the early days. I think in the early days of my career, the challenges were different. If I think back on my time when I was, in my early 20s, let's say, I think the challenge was very much focus. There were so many, like I said, there were so many things pulling me in different directions that the keeping focused on what I wanted to do was different. I mean, I got offered a job in politics. I got offered a job in business development. My dad wanted me to stop uni altogether to come and work on a family business. Anyway, so I had a lot of distractions happening. But after then moving here to the UK, I think everything changed, and the kind of the focus really became, how do I establish myself as a professional? How do I start to make a difference? But I think these last few years working in sport is where I truly found my motto. Let's say I found my groove, and I think supporting female leaders in sport, championing diversity, championing equality. This just gives me great pride in and something that I absolutely feel like I have and can make a huge difference for other people working with me. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And you've been a great role model, and women in the industry, can look up to your great work and hopefully, get inspired and continue on a similar path within this industry.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's exactly what's needed, right? We need a lot more, female leaders, a lot more visibility. We need to, that's the only way for us to be able to make a huge difference. We need to support each other and kind of lift each other up as we go. So that is a big part of my life now.
So you mentioned some challenges there, but has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Oh gosh, there's been many different bumps on the road for sure. Well, we talked about a few there already, but I think the way to overcome them has always been the same for me. Focus, like we talked about, resilience, and just this desire to really, leave things better than what I found them. I'm a big believer in plan A and having a plan B and having a plan C. And just, always hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. So that's the kind of person that I am on my professional life, but also my personal life. But in regards to, overcoming any challenges that have come my way, it's always been about that, and also never compromising on my personal values, my morals. Being a great role model for the people that I work with, and trying to, do great work, but always with that growth mindset, because I think, that's what working life is about, right? You solve one problem, then there's another problem, and then you solve that problem, and then another problem comes along. And I think by the time you resolve all of those different problems, you get to go home at the end of the day, right? But and that goes around and again and again and again. And I think it's really important for young people coming into sport, coming into any industry, to be fair, to have that really clear view of what working life is. Is about having fun, making sure that you're making a difference, having integrity, and then most importantly, having resilience, because, every day there's a new challenge that you need to overcome. And I think that's how I live my life.
I love that. And, mention some bumps, how you got over it, and some great advice there as well. Is there something I haven't asked you yet that you want to mention?
I think it would be nice for us to talk about the current state of where we are. We talked a little about female leadership, and perhaps, what else can we do? What steps could we do to try and close that gap? So I think, as we talked about, Marcus, progress is happening and it's great to see, but I think there is still a long way to go. And the way for us to close that gap is for us to understand that, actively we need to lean into it with intent. If we know we are underrepresented in some areas, we need to make sure, recruitment practices are right, and hiring processes are spot on. And we're doing everything we can to be able to not just bring women to sport, but keep them here. I think that's incredibly important. And how do we do that? How do we deliver that sustainable effort at scale and for the long term? That's what I want to, people to be talking about and focusing about.
Yeah, and that's really important. So, what can, someone like us who is in the industry, and we are in different parts of the industry, but what are some tangible things that we can do, or maybe think about, or actions to make maybe just a small, change for the better?
Yeah, you need to speak. You need to talk. Because I think every day we see and we hear things that doesn't feel quite right in the industry. And it's really important that we all, are not afraid to bring that up to the surface and discuss it and call it out if something isn't quite right. Because I think that's the only way that things will change. And having that emotional safety in teams is incredibly important. I think that's why I feel so lucky to be working what I am, because I currently have that in my role. I know that if something isn't going quite well, I can have a conversation with my manager, an honest conversation with my manager, and together we're going to sit down and resolve it and move it forward together. And I think that's really important. But I also know that's not the experience that everyone else is having in the industry. So that's what I would like, everyone to be in that position. So being able to speak up, and if you see something that isn't quite right, and just actively creating the right environments for those conversations to even take place, and creating space for that movement to grow and to take over.
That's really important, and great that you brought that up.
Indeed, yeah. It's a lot, but that's where it all starts.
Definitely. I'd like to end on a networking question. It's a little bit on the spot question, but do you think there is someone from your network that would be a good guest on this podcast?
Oh, I was just looking at your previous podcast just before I joined the call. And one person that came to mind, I don't know if you know her, but she's called Mary Connor. She's the US Executive Director for Footballco. Footballco is an incredibly renowned organization which uses let's call it the power of football to really bring people together and deliver positive impact in society. So brilliant people to work with. Mary is a legend, actually. So anytime that you speak with her or with her team, is always a blessing, and you kind of leave the conversation feeling inspired. She is currently helping us deliver a program called Go Projects in the US, where we're going to fuse music and football and then work with different communities in places like Denver and Atlanta. So she would be someone who has brilliant stories to tell. And I'm actually really looking forward to working together with Mary, the team at Footballco, in the lead up to the World Cup next year. And then, of course, the Women's World Cup in Brazil in 2027 to deliver some really inspiring stories that will, not just enhance fans' experiences and bring more people into the sport, but hopefully change the direction of the women's game altogether for good.
Yeah, that's a great guest suggestion, Mary Connor. Fabi, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast and for being a great role model and professional in the sports industry.
Thank you so much for having me, and all the best with the podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.